special good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to yet another OO-ALC webinar. And we are in the middle of just an awesome series, Diversity and Inclusion. If you were blessed to be here yesterday, you would have heard from Colonel Carol as she launched our discussion that will be all but it'll be a four-part discussion technically, and we are going to be diving into part two of that discussion today. And so we are really blessed to have Dr. Hamrick with us, who will be introduced a little bit more formally here in a moment. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Mandy for a few housekeeping comments. Mandy?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Just a reminder, I know that you guys are familiar with these, but remember to turn your microphones off. And today, if you want to use the chat box, we'd love to hear from you guys. If you're new to Zoom, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's 3 dots and it says more. Just click on that, type in your questions, your comments. We'll try to address them throughout the presentation today. And Ron, just a reminder to you as well, when you are standing in front of the microphone, almost in front of the camera, that's going to be when we can hear you best.
Okay.
So over to you for the objective.
All right. Well, at the conclusion of this presentation, I believe and we hope we will all have a much better understanding of how our words impact and affect our environment. We're going to hear a lot about the power of words today. And, you know, many have shared that words are so central to a culture. Once you can understand words and once you embrace words and you get indoctrinated or understand or embrace words, you can certainly transition very quickly into a culture. And as we work on transforming our culture into diversity and inclusion, we're going to find out that words are very powerful in helping us get there as fast as possible. But I'm not going to steal any more thunder from our team today. So Mandy, I am going to turn it over to you for the formal introductions.
You bet. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote today, Dr. Hamrick, and again, our moderator from yesterday, Miss Denise Elbert. So Dr. Hamrick is currently our Director of Staff, for those of you who don't know, for the Ogden Air Logistics Complex. And we are lucky to have her here today. She started out getting her Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and went on to get her doctorate in Physical Chemistry from the U of U. She's also attended Air War College and has had a variety of experiences here at Hill Air Force Base throughout chemistry and being a branch chief and a group director or a deputy group director, and now our Director of Staff. She's also won the Leo Marquez Award, the very distinguished at the AFMC level, and the Spirit of American Women Award. So welcome, ma'am, today. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. And very quickly, I want to remind you of who Denise Elbert is, for those of you who haven't met her before. She is a veteran of our Air Force and also is currently a wingman advocate. She currently resides on the board of directors at the Inclusion Center in Salt Lake City and is a youth mental health first aid trainer. So kudos to her. She's also won the Air Force Affirmative Employment Award winner. And we're just so grateful to have her here today. So over to you, Miss Denise. Welcome.
Thank you, Mandy. It is a joy to be with Dr. Hamrick. She and I go back a bit all the way to engineering directorate days. And so it is going to be imperative that we pay attention to her because her words today are going to matter. In the midst of all of our sensing sessions, we need to know how we express ourselves and how it may be taken. Dr. Hamrick?
Okay. Well, thank you, Ron and Mandy. I appreciate you designing this webinar series. Really kind of an out-of-the-box thing to do, and I appreciate the opportunity of coming and continuing this important dialogue. I want to start with something very obvious. Words have power, and because you speak the words, you have the power. Using affirmative words, you have the power to make someone's day, to instill confidence, to inspire them, and maybe you could even change their life. Those words are enduring and can stay and last and have lasting effects. It can ripple through one's day and also have an effect also in charting one's course in life. On the other end of the spectrum, negative words, abusive comments can really take someone's dream away, make them feel hurt, ashamed, not valued, and maybe even make them give up. So those are the two extremes in the power of words. Sometimes our seemingly innocent words can hurt someone, and we're not even aware that that happens. That lack of intention doesn't necessarily ease that hurt that we may impose on someone.
Wow, we're starting out on a high note. It's so true. We all know that people have said things to us that can take us down on a day that we were feeling really up. And on the flip side, we've had people that would say just the right thing, and it turns our world completely around. What do you say about that, Dr. Hamrick?
Certainly that, yeah, words can endure and ripple throughout the day. So, and it's contagious. So if you give me a compliment, and I can now take that and say some nice affirming words to someone else. And then on the flip side, I can go home and kick my dog at the end of the day, something I really don't want to do. But yeah, those words can affect your mood, and you can take that home with you. I want to look at words examined from a logical perspective. If you were looking at words just like they were in a transcript, it doesn't really paint the whole picture. Context, body language, even the tone that you use can really be just as important as the words we use to convey a message. It makes me wonder in this age of social media, and I haven't really embraced social media. I'm an older American. But in social media, just the written words without all of these attributes of context, body language, tone, gives the words even more power than they deserve. So we have to be careful about that.
When you say that, I'm reminded of the song that said, "Video killed a radio star." When people sang on the radio, our imaginations could go anywhere we want them to. But when we started seeing what went along with the words, it changed the whole story. And a lot of us do pay more attention to tone and expression than the actual words that are being said. That's what hurts social media so much.
It does. It does. Let's talk about some words that are seemingly, at least on the surface, very innocent, but in the context of prejudice, that not only hurt, but can have some lasting consequences. I choose the word prejudice here because I think all of us have a common notion of what that word means. We have a very narrow interpretation of that word, and it's a very strong and negative term. I want to ratchet that back again and use something a little more neutral. For the purposes of this webinar, I want to use the term implicit bias. Implicit bias is our underlying assumptions that sometimes we may not even be conscious of that skew our worldview, and then it comes up in some of our comments and actions. You know, we all have biases. It's natural. Having a bias does not make you a good or a bad person. It just makes you human.
We were taught that if you have a brain, you have biases. Most of us have brains, so we have biases.
That's true. I want to introduce a few terms that our organizational analysts have introduced to me. I just recently learned them. I wish I had taken a psychology class in college because it's a fascinating subject. Maybe when I retire, I'll go back to school and study a little bit more. But these new terms I just learned, I've spent the weekend studying them, are microaggressions and macroaggressions. Macroaggressions are intentional words or behavior that reveal a perpetrator's overt racism, sexism, and homophobia. The intention is very clear. It's harm, shame, and even worse, overt, hostile, discriminatory words and behavior can even be criminal, leading to harassment and violence. Microaggressions are words and behaviors that we use in our everyday interactions with people. They communicate some sort of bias to historically marginalized groups of people, such as women, people of color, the LGBT community. These, another way to think of these would be micro insults or mini insults. They're small, you can endure them. They're annoying, like pinpricks or mosquito bites, but after you get so many, it can aggregate into an open wound or a sore point. Microaggression is covert and insidious. It's around us so much that we don't even recognize them, and over time they become accepted as a social norm or practice. So even those that use microaggressions may dismiss them, and even those on the receiving end may just shrug them off as something that's just part of our normal vernacular. Microaggressive words often come as veiled compliments. So from my perspective as an American with an Asian heritage, I'm often told that I speak good English considering. So this compliment's really insulting to me because it conveys that as an Asian American, I'm a foreigner in my own country. And then it has that hidden message that maybe I really don't belong here. In college, I majored in chemistry, a traditional male dominated field at that time. I was often the only female in most of my classes, and many of my male classmates would say to me, "What made you think you could handle such a difficult major?" Or, "You're really smart for a girl. Can you help me with my math?" So how do I take that? I mean, that implies that women, one, are not as intelligent as men. And then that second comment also smacks of that girls are not as intelligent as they expected. And then the math comment implies that all Asians are good at math. So some may take that as a stereotype. It could even border on a microaggression as well, too. So at the end of my senior year, I was graduating with my bachelor's in chemistry. I got the department's Outstanding Chemistry Graduate Award. The department head had a small little ceremony. My name went on a plaque in the front office. And the department chair just kept going on and on about all those male names on the plaque. And then there was mine. I know he meant well. He was trying to emphasize an important milestone. And if he had chosen his words a little bit more carefully, I may have taken that as a positive. But, you know, from my perception, it made me feel like an aberration, that maybe even my selection was a token minority gesture. And I think I felt that way, and I worried maybe that others, my peers, felt that way as well.
I want to touch base on tokenism. A lot of people don't realize that is an actual ism. Tokenism in the workplace is the practice of doing something such as hiring a person who belongs to a minority group or one of our historically marginalized groups, only to prevent criticism and to give the appearance of inclusion, people being treated fairly. And we know that one makes a token, but tokenism doesn't help us in the long run.
Yes. So for Black men and women, microaggressions are not so subtle as the two examples I just gave you, and they're more frequent and much more damaging. All of you are familiar with what's going on in terms of current events. I, like you, just see what's on the news and what's reported by the media. So I certainly don't have all the facts, but in my opinion, a lot of this started with individual biases that transcended into institutional biases that were accepted, became social norms, and then escalated into unchecked violence. So very tragic what's going on today. I can't speak from the personal experience as a Black man or woman, so I researched a little bit, asked some others for some perspectives, and so here's a few examples of those. So when a Black woman goes into an upscale department store and is told that the clearance section is downstairs, I mean, that clerk is displaying a microaggression that you know, conveys kind kind of a socioeconomic stereotype that that customer doesn't belong there. I don't know why people just can't be treated the same, just as any customer walking into the store. Hello, how can I help you? That would have been the more appropriate greeting. Another one I heard is, imagine a black man coming in his first day on the job. He's in a white collar type profession, and his new peers are asking him right away, how did you get here? Is your wife white? When I first heard that, I thought, okay, those seem like two very separate questions. They would never be asked one after the other. It doesn't make sense to me. Again, not having that perspective, it was explained to me that, well, here's what that means. First of all, you're not really, you don't really belong here, because maybe as a black man, you're not as educated, maybe not as polished as one would expect. And maybe the reason you did get here was because you married up in the social class, and a white woman helped get you that polish and that in to get that job. So I hope you realize by now, comments like these that are incessant and frequent can take a mental toll. And eventually it makes a person, it sends that message that you and others that look like you don't belong here, you're not included, you're not valued, and that can certainly affect someone's hope. It may kill their dreams. It creates a real palpable physical barrier and produce stress that can manifest into physical illnesses as well. So those are some examples of microaggressions and some of the consequences.
Dr. Hamrick, you did research, and that's what a lot of people, I hear this a lot. Oh, I don't know anything about that. And you actually gave the answer to the I don't know anything about that question. You research and you find out the stories. You talk to people who don't look like you, and you talk to them about their experiences. I have a world of experiences, but I also have parents that did not let me take a lot of those experiences to heart. But I see it. And I've been guilty of the, oh, just let it go by. But it wasn't something that I should have let go by. And maybe it didn't affect me the way it may have affected a colleague of mine. And so things that we're not sure about, we really should research, and we should be open to it and open to getting to know why we're experiencing what we're experiencing today.
Yeah, it can really be eye-opening and revealing. Yes. You know, if we sit back and wait for somebody to tell us they've been offended, we may be waiting for a very long time. Many people suffer in silence. It takes a bit of courage to call someone out for a microaggression. And if you add that power dynamic of rank or organizational structure on top of that, it takes a lot of courage to speak out. I've been told that, I'm just too much in my head, and that's true, I'm an introvert, or that I overanalyze the moment and I'm just too sensitive. But, at the end of the day, I've just been offended. And by telling me that it was my fault, just made that insult worse. So, when you bring up a microaggression and critique somebody, their walls automatically go up. It assails their self-image of themselves, because they are good, decent, moral people. How could they be saying things and be unaware and can't relate to how their comments are perceived by others? So why is this important? Why can't these minor slights be graciously laughed off? Downplaying microaggressions ignores that link to implicit bias. And when we ignore it, we sanction it, basically. Calling in and calling out someone who's committed a microaggression can be a good teaching moment, especially in this environment where we're trying to talk about things. And if someone is open to a little self-discovery, they could learn something that's very important and revealing. remember that everyone is guilty of a microaggression because it's implicit bias that's due to our environment and our collective experiences. For instance, my mother, she's Korean, she was born in the mid-1920s, back in the good old days when there was one Korean peninsula. She was born in the north. But in the 1920s, the Japanese had invaded the Korean peninsula. She did not see her Korean flag till she was a teenager. So she has a lot of negative raw memories of the Japanese soldiers invading her homeland. And so she translated that to all Japanese people. I grew up in her household as her only child. And so some of those biases that she had obviously translated to me as well. And I like to think that I've worked through that and have grown through that, but that's a continuous journey that I still have to this day.
How easy is it for you to buy a Japanese-made car, Dr. Hamrick?
It took me a long time. I think I waited till I was about 40 years old. But I have married a half Japanese man. So,
There's
I have
hope.
moved forward, yes.
Yes.
And I've eaten sushi and like it. Yes. Okay. There's an illusion that successful people can't be harmed by words, that they've got this career hardened shell and, negative words just bounce off of that. I mean, look at our political leaders. They're constantly enduring all of these negative comments. The truth is that everyone has a life story, and we bring that story all the way with us through our lifetime and into adulthood. A major pain point of mine that I'm still dealing with is the pronunciation of my name. It's a Korean name, and I grew up going to elementary school as a 6-year-old. I grew up in Ogden, Utah. My classmates, I would say, were probably 95% Caucasian. All my teachers were white. I'm half Korean, half white. So what peer group do you think I would identify with? Think of that small child. I naturally wanted to be accepted and part of that peer group within my class. But I looked different and I had a very unusual name. Teachers meant well as they struggled to pronounce my name. When substitute teachers came, that was a bad day for me. They really struggled with the pronunciation of my name, and every time it was mispronounced, all my classmates would laugh, and my name morphed into many nicknames over time. So this was very difficult for me. I'd go to my mother, and she told me to embrace my heritage, and this experience would make me stronger someday. But as a young child, I didn't have that wisdom. What ended up happening was that I became ashamed of my Asian half and ashamed of my name. When I was in high school and applied for my first job, I was afraid that the pronunciation of my name would be a barrier to someone picking up the phone and calling me for an interview. So I just replaced it with a normal Caucasian name. And still to this day, when I make a reservation at a restaurant, I use an alias name, just so I don't have to confront that emotional pain from childhood that still boils up.
That's a basic common courtesy. And for some reason or the other, a lot of us humans don't like to say, how do you pronounce your name? Or that's a very unique name. Does your name have a meaning? And they give you an opportunity to tell you how to say your name. As we're talking about names and careers, I was told when I got ready to retire from the military that I should change my name to initials. Because if I applied as Denise Elbert, they'll say, oh, it's a woman. But if I put DJ Elbert, they wouldn't know. And so we still suffer from some of that today.
Yes, it's your example just made me think. When I conclude an email, I use my initials. Maybe subconsciously, there's some reasoning behind that as well. Okay. In truth, all of our experiences have molded us into who we are today. If you can listen without judging, that can lead to understanding. and eventually empathy. Empathy can develop when you just let go of your ego just a little bit and allow a little bit of room for understanding someone else's perspective. So how do we get to a unified effort and transform our language so it's more singular and family-oriented and inclusive of dialogue? I think the most important point is that we really have to care about each other. And we can relate back to our core values. Service before self comes to mind. When you're talking about mission, that core value relates to sacrifice. When we talk about people, it means adopting a plural mindset and standing up for one another. If we can open our mind, we can unfreeze those internal biases that we have, learn some new perspectives, and refreeze that with empathy and understanding. As Colonel Carroll said yesterday, we are all part of this grand Air Force tapestry, and we need to feel like that family. Empathy and understanding begins that important transition from me to we. And I think General von Hoffman will talk about that at the closure of our webinar, where she talks about one airman, one goal.
Under the banner of diversity and inclusion, everything that you just said is so important, because a lot of us, when we hear things, we take it to heart instead of thinking about it from another person's perspective. And so when you're doing that service before self, you are thinking about how the other person or your team members may feel in terms of big A Air Force instead of just yourself as an individual. And we're all on that tapestry. Colonel Carroll made that perfectly clear yesterday. We're all on the tapestry that makes our American flag, makes us American, and makes us do the things that we do to support the mission. I really appreciate the fact that you tied in our core values, because that is in our D&I regulation, that we honor the diversity because of our core values in our Air Force mission. Thank you for that.
So kind of closing things up, our call to action today, I would just tell everybody to be open to self-discovery and self-examination. Start by examining your particular worldview and how that was shaped. And does your worldview align with your own core values? That'll be a great conversation for you to have with yourself. And you could have that conversation with your family, your grandkids as well. Maybe not dinner table talk, but something worth pursuing. Second thing is if you are called in or out for a microaggression, for committing one, remember everybody commits these because we all have internal biases. Don't be defensive. Remember the person that called you out, it took some courage for them to approach you. And the reason they approached you is because they respect you and they want you to be a better person. Okay? And they know that you can be better. So seek to understand from a heart of empathy and be more self-aware in the future. Another thing that's important is to really dig into our nation's history a bit. I'm a student of history. It's a very personal interest of mine. Remember, his story comes from the words, his story. So sometimes what you are taught in school is a one-sided view. Remember, some of American history is ugly, and you can't really change that or sugarcoat it, but you can understand it. I remember some of the things in the history books and what you may have been taught in high school is incomplete. You didn't get the full context of that particular time frame, and so you should try and study it to understand it a little bit more. Some of the background and the true story can be lost in the way it's portrayed. And then finally, and I think a lot of our speakers are going to say this, get to know someone that's a little different than you. Take somebody out to lunch, try and understand their background, where they grew up, and they'll have a different perspective, and that'll just add to your knowledge bank so you can be more self-aware in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Hamrick. I would be remiss if I didn't make this correction. From the Air Force Materiel Command standpoint, we would prefer that people call in. And the difference between calling in and calling out is very simple. When you call in, you point things out with empathy and understanding, and you listen with empathy and understanding. When you call out, you usually lack empathy. You are letting someone know exactly how you feel. You usually do it in public and embarrass folks, make a scene, which you can see would lead to a more hostile situation. So for our command purposes, we're asking that you call in because we need the dialogue to continue. Thank you, Dr. Hamrick. Thank you.
Right, and I
Ron
believe
and Mandy.
I think we have a question. So Mandy, is there a question there? I believe there is a question and a comment.
You bet. And I just want to say real quick, thanks for those great call to actions. Those are great reminders. And I think the world would be so much better with a little more empathy. So I love it. We also had a shout out in the chat box, Dr. Hamrick, when you were just sharing your personal stuff. That goes such a long ways. And so you have appreciation from your audience for sure. Lastly, we have a question that says, we've began discussing biases and stereotypes. Does the government see and acknowledge systemic racism similar to institutional biases?
Yes, they do. And that's one of the reasons why there is such a push for learning the meaning of diversity and the meaning of inclusion and taking action so that we can undo some of that systemic and institutionalized racism. It does stem from what we've been talking about, our environment, how we were raised, the things that we bring to the table that might not serve us well. So yes, we do recognize it and we will be working on it.
Awesome. Very cool.
Copy that. Thanks, Ron. That was all I had.
All right. Awesome. Wow. This was very intriguing and educational and motivational and transformational. I know it's hard to have discussions like this and not just feel like you just want to grow a little bit more and research and learn and just continue to learn. And this is one of the reasons why we do this. We really believe professional development is a continuous process. It's not linear, it's definitely cyclical. And so we continue to learn every day. And I really, really appreciate Dr. Hamrick. You rocked it as usual. And it's so exciting to hear from Colonel Carol and her presentation yesterday. And then we look forward to what's happening in upcoming webinars. So next week, we continue the series. The saga continues. And so the third part, we're going to have Colonel Boring, who is the Aircraft Maintenance Support Group Commander here. And he will be sharing on overcoming constraints. We're going to be looking at productivity via diversity. And that's going to be kind of an awesome subject because now that we have introduced the subject, now we talked about the words portion about it, now we're really looking at who we are as a culture, the broader culture of the depot where, we serve customers, we help fix and return their airplanes and all their weapons systems. And the question is, how does this particular discussion of D&I impact the work part, the production part, the widget part of what we do? And so Colonel Boring will be here to share on that, and he has got some absolutely phenomenal information. Mandy, you want to share about what's happening when General Hoffman finally wraps up?
You bet. Our series is set to conclude with General von Hoffman. I believe it's the middle of September. We'll make sure we get those dates to you, but we want you all to join us for all of those so the discussion can continue. And it may continue. Denise, and we've all talked about, extending it past this if the audience is engaged enough and sees a need for this. So, but also on the 24th of September, we have the kickoff to If I Know, what was the title, Ron? What was the final verdict?
I should have known this. I should have had it. This is just hot off the press. We just got the release of the new title, but bottom line is it's a take off of the More You Know series. So I think or we should know, or it's something like that. But it's it's a spin-off of the More You Know series. So
You bet.
that's going to be kind of an awesome.
So on that, we'll get you the title, but we're just really excited about it. A guy in aircraft thought of it, and so it's going to be all good news across OO-ALC, good news stories, things from the mission, how we can connect one another and understand what's going on across the OO-ALC. And also in October, we have a female interview with an engineer. So what's a day in the life like of a female engineer? We've got that coming up as well. So you guys have a wonderful day. That's all from me. And I'll turn it over to you, Ron, or Doc Hamrick for any last comment.
Well, I actually have one other interjection too. So Colonel Carroll was gracious enough to also, she'll be returning to share the second portion of her presentation. So if you remember, yesterday she introduced and shared and emphasized a lot more about diversity. She is going to be returning before General Hoffman speaks. At least that's what we tentatively have on our schedule right now, to share about inclusion. And so that may happen on the 10th or the week after that. So we will keep you informed. We will certainly let you know when that happens. And again, like in all the webinars, we just encourage you to continue to sign up, tell a friend, spread the word, send an invite, get more people involved, let them know just how easy and how exciting it is to get on a Zoom and actually learn a whole lot more. And so I'm going to turn it over to our panel for some final words, and then we will close things out.
Well, Ron, I appreciate the demonstration.
More.
So that's great. Hey, I just want to close it by saying thank you to everyone that set this up, again, designing this whole series. Thought out. Very much appreciated. And in terms of this topic, I'm just going to take it sort of back to the beginning. Remember that your words have power. You want to use your power wisely.
I apologize. The sound seemed to have gone out.
Okay, we are still there. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. We lost Dr. Hamrick right as she was saying what was the beginning and how she was tying it up.
Okay, go again.
Okay, so speak loudly. Can you hear me, Mandy?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. So I just wanted to circle back to the beginning words, that words have power, and that means you have power, and please use your power to spread goodness in the world, and use your power wisely and often.
Awesome.
And I want to conclude with very powerful words to Mandy and Ron and the complex for helping build this diversity and inclusion platform so that we can get the word out. Those two powerful words are, thank you.
And awesome. And again, we thank you for coming and being a part of this experience, and go out and care and just be a part of this experience of diversity and inclusion. And on that note, we want to say thank you so much for joining us. Have a great Air Force Day. God bless.